everyone. Welcome to another episode of Convos With Sazón. I am your host, Cata Mejía, and I am extremely excited to introduce today's guest. With us today is Tish Carmona, the inaugural Director of Communications at Unrivaled. How are you? Welcome.
I'm doing so well. Thank you for having me.
Of course. I'm so excited to have you here. So obviously, our listeners don't know, but we go back a couple years. I know you as a fellow Terp. Mm-hmm. We went to the University of Maryland, right? I know you as a fellow Upper East Sider. You have some Colombian in you, which we have in common as well. You're a fellow dog mom. But for those of you who don't know you, give us a little introduction. And we'll get to your role at Unrivaled in a moment. But tell me who you are as just... Who is Tish?
Just who is Tish? Well, you said a lot of it that I really identify with. Even though I'm working in athletics, I always consider myself an athlete. Actually recovering from a torn ACL right now from soccer. But that's always been, part of me and my identity, just health and wellness. I also love being a dog mom. I aspire to run an animal shelter one day.
I didn't know that.
Yes. I just, honestly love life and love taking advantage of everything that is, afforded to me. And I'm super grateful to be living in New York City, to be, with the job that I have and just with the friends and family that I have. It's, just a super grateful person.
I love that. Just out of curiosity, how long have you been in New York at this point?
Over 6 years. So I think I moved in December of 2018. So... Yeah, and I'd previously been, I did a summer in the city back in 2016, best summer ever. That was so much fun with just an internship in sports at Lagardère Sports and Entertainment. So
that means we were in the city the same summer year. Without knowing it.
Wow, really?
Yes.
Because I feel like a lot of people were in the city that summer, and maybe even mutual friends of ours like Stone and Matt and others. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm glad that we make the most of it now.
Yes.
Okay, so that's amazing. You mentioned something about working in sports, right? And that's something that is both personal and professional to you because you're an athlete and you're passionate about it. I'd love to know how you got your start in the world of sports and athletics.
Absolutely. So even though I did grow up, playing sports, I played volleyball and tennis primarily. I didn't really know that was a career that you could have. I was a junior in high school, and I just needed direction on where I would even, go to college or what I would study in college. And my junior year Spanish teacher said, I think you'd be good at communications. And I was like, okay, great. Or good at PR. And I said, great, that's what I'm going to major in. That's what I'm going to do for my entire life. And she, to this day, I bet she doesn't really realize the impact that she had. But sometimes when you're a student or you're young, you just kind of need someone to tell you what step to take so that you can at least get started. And if you realize it's not for you, I could have easily changed directions. But to me, it was just really important to have that start. And when she said that, I was kind of looking online and I was seeing, I was a big fan of the Yankees growing up. My dad, was a huge Yankees fan and raised me to be a Yankees fan. And so I Googled, I was like, do the Yankees have PR? And they did. And I was like, great, I'm going to do PR for the Yankees one day. But I kind of just put that in the back of my mind. I got to the University of Maryland and was just doing a lot of different internships in whatever it may have been. So I was working with the division of IT. I even worked for a tech startup. I was just doing all these different communications internships, but not focused on sport directly. And then another, mutual friend of ours Eric Augustino had been doing marketing for athletics at Maryland. And he's like, they have a media relations department. And I said, oh, that's really cool. Let me apply. And so when that, the person I applied for the internship with saw that I had played volleyball growing up, she's like, oh, great, you'll do some volleyball help with that SID. And so that's how I kind of got my start in it. And then I, picked up working for the other sports. So basketball, football, I did lacrosse. So just being able to be part of the ecosystem of, sports information at Maryland, that was really my entryway. And then when I saw that people made their full-time jobs out of it, I was like, okay, this is actually something I want to do. It was so much fun. You're getting, paid to essentially be at the games. And at that point, I was just passing out stats. But it was so fun, and the energy and just, feeling like you're really part of just a really exciting industry. So that's where I kind of got the start in sports. And then I had applied to an internship with the Washington Commanders after that. And that's what kind of got me, full-time and then working in sports for my career.
So in addition, it's crazy, right? What it takes or the impact that just that little bit of guidance has, like you mentioned. Aside from that initial nudge, what about the industry not necessarily sports specifically, but what about communications made it kind of click in your head as a viable option?
Yeah, I think that I don't know, I've always been kind of a yapper. I grew up very shy, and then one day I just kind of decided that I wanted to be outgoing. I just like flipped a switch, and I was like, I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to talk to people. I'm going to be really like, just put myself out there. And so I started, communicating as much as possible. And I found that people always were able to kind of like tell me things or just feel comfortable speaking to me. And I felt like communications is one of those, roles that I tell people that my job is just to make people talk to each other. And so I felt like I just had a unique ability to, bridge that gap, make people feel comfortable, and just find where I was meant to be. Because I think that communications skills are very undervalued. And I also, aside from just the talking part of it, it's the writing portion of it, which, shout out to the courses I took at Maryland, because that really improved my writing skills. And I thought I knew how to write before taking this one course, and apparently I did not. My grammar, it was grammar boot camp, and it just really propelled, my career as well, because that's what got me even the full-time job at the Commanders. When I was interning with them, one of the supervisors I had said, I think to our boss, he was like, I think that she might be a better writer than I am. And that it just like my writing skills really stood out to them. So that's, all those kind of things combined. I even grew up, writing songs, poems, whatever. So it's just like writing and reading and communicating always were part of my life. And it's like, if you can, just continue doing that as a profession, it kind of makes sense.
100%. Why not get paid for something you're already good at and you like to do? I love that. Let's talk about the fact that sports, although times are changing for the better, in my opinion, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but sports is such a male-dominated field. What has your experience been like throughout the course of your career, right, thus far, as not only a woman, but a Latina, which is it's kind of like a minority within the minority of such a big industry? Tell me about that.
It's been really interesting. I think that in certain sports sectors, they're probably a little bit better than others. But, that was why I was really grateful when I, got to the NBA. I saw a lot of people who looked like me. I just felt very included. They had Latino employee resource teams and just all these different ways that, women, we had a women resource team. So there were different ways that we felt, part of sports and really part of the growth of sport in general. Not everywhere has had the same experience. Unfortunately, there had been some pretty public, cases against the Washington Commanders, and that happened during the time that I was there, where just, sexual harassment was an issue there. And so that was definitely a shocker when I first got into sports. Honestly, I thought that every team probably operated that way, and I'm very glad that my experience has been totally different after that. But it was kind of disappointing, honestly. You don't want to be treated differently, and usually when I walk into a room, because I don't look at people and, think that they are a certain way because of what they look like or who they are or whatever else. Like, I always expected people to just take me for my abilities or the person that I was, and just not that I was a Latina or that I was a woman. And, there's definitely some times where you see it happening to other people. But to me, I really try to just put it out of my mind. It's like, no, I deserve to be here. I deserve to be in this space. Like, I wouldn't, I know imposter syndrome is really hard to get over, and in some ways, like, I definitely feel like in this role it's a huge step up for me, and the imposter syndrome is real. But then just looking around and seeing other amazing, talented, and Black and brown employees who are women at Unrivaled, where I'm at, it's incredible, and I feel like so at home and so just fortunate that again, because even for Unrivaled, it is a league primarily like dominated by Black and brown women. It is those are the athletes that make the league what it is, and so just to kind of like see myself in them, even if I'm being Latina, I just have some kind of a different approach to it, or like being able to have some kind of similarity of being like other in larger society.
Of course.
So that it's just been great. Like, and I think that over time I've built up my my relationships with other Latinos in the sports industry too, which has really helped. And just finding those, commonalities and other people who are doing the work to highlight women and Latino women in the industry and, just staying in touch with them. It's really important because I think that you always want to make sure that people see a path forward for, if you want to, if you can see her, you could be her.
100%.
So I definitely believe in that, and that's always
I
been
love
big.
that because that's honestly what this podcast is all about, making sure that whatever the dream is for those listening seems more attainable because they know now firsthand about someone who maybe didn't have a linear path, but nonetheless is getting closer to it or has already reached it. So I love that. You mentioned, kind of realizing early on in your career at the Washington Commanders, kind of like a harsh reality, potentially maybe a turning point. Would you say that was a glass-shattering moment? And however much you want to delve into that, you're welcome to. But I think it's important to talk about those things, in terms of when you enter an industry, right, you have your own personal expectations and you also have the outside noise of what to expect. And then it's where those two meet, which is actually what you live through, what you see, what you experience, for the better or not, that kind of set that foundation,
For sure. I mean, it was more of a turning point after the fact. So I remember reading the news article. It was actually during the pandemic, so 2020, might have been June, where the article broke about, the case, the sexual harassment case against the Washington Commanders, and just reading all of that, it was kind of like someone was airing out your dirty laundry, and just having to go back to that support system that I had, because I had already been in New York for over a year at that point, and so just reading that through and just being like, holy cow, that is a lot of just stuff that it was like past trauma that I didn't realize I had to unpack. And so then to go back and have to do that work and, even just seeing a therapist for the first time, you're dealing with a pandemic, the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, there were just a lot of heavy things going on. And that was also kind of a turning point in my career too, where it was, thinking about, how we communicate around certain issues. It was just both internally, from an organizational perspective, to just how, you're showing up online and having your own personal beliefs and just standing up for what's right. And so it was definitely a turning point, I think, for me to speak up for what I think is right in an organization. And I always advocate for people to do that. Had I really put two and two together when I was back at the Commanders and were oh, maybe I shouldn't have let that slide, then, who knows what would have happened. But it just, to me, I really want to emphasize to anyone who does feel like injustices are happening or they see something that is not, appropriate or not, inclusive in a way, then, to say something about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for saying that, because I think it takes a lot of courage, like you said, to revisit and to not only deal with your personal feelings towards that situation, but then also to kind of turn it around and use it as an opportunity to encourage others and empower others. So thank you for doing that. Along those same lines of empowering others, you've been at what I would argue are really notable organizations, the Washington Commanders, the NBA, the WNBA, now Unrivaled. What would you say to those listening who may feel like what they're working towards is unattainable? Or
oh my gosh.
It's intimidating, because I'm sure you spoke about imposter syndrome, and we've all felt it at some point throughout our entire careers. It's not just at the beginning, right? And talk about the process of, when you're applying and how maybe you had to, fend for yourself at times, and then actually being in those organizations, kind of realizing when it's time to make that switch, in addition to, wait a second, I belong here and I've earned certain progressions in my career.
Yeah, so I think there's a few different parts of that where you're, first of all, you want to make sure that you have built up, a network and have some connections, and getting to know people within the industry already, it makes you feel a little bit more, not just welcome, but just that the veil of what it's like to work in the industry is kind of lifted. I think that it is a highly sought after industry to work in, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. Nothing is really impossible, and that's what I always, that's also a belief, and I'm kind of big on manifestation, and also just if you believe it to be true, that it'll come true. And so I even said, before I even knew what manifestation was, I was I'm going to do PR for the Yankees. And it's while I'm not doing PR for the Yankees, I am doing PR in sports. And that's back when I was 16, just kind of like speaking that into existence, I think is really powerful. And, it takes hard work and dedication and setting yourself up in the right ways to get there. But it really isn't impossible. I think that there are more opportunities than ever. I mean, just look at, within WNBA, especially right now, there's expansion teams coming out, and there's even like new women's sports leagues launching, between the volleyball leagues and, where there's Athletes Unlimited, Unrivaled, like there continue to be more opportunities, especially in women's sports, but just across the board, I think that sports are really impactful and just always evolving ecosystem, so you can get into the sports industry in different ways. And I'd also say that there's a lot of different avenues to go about it. So, even if you're in finance and you're like, oh, like every team or every league needs people to work in finance for the team. So there's always ways to do it. I would say just continuing to talk to people who are in the industry and getting advice, and as much as you can intern, as much as you can get some experience wherever you can, I think it's really important to do, because those connections are what kind of set you apart, and building genuine relationships, not just like reaching out to someone every now and then and being like, hey, like let's grab coffee and I would like to talk about X, Y, and Z. Building those genuine connections and building those relationships with others, where even if you're a student, the fact, like, whether you follow up every couple of months or so, like you'll stay in those people's minds more than someone who just reaches out once. And so it is exhausting. I mean, a lot of things in life are, but it's definitely worth it. I think working in sports is an incredible place to be, and I'm super fortunate.
I love it. And I will also say that as someone who has known you from college, right, and who identifies in many ways, it's so exciting to see you get to the places that you are, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like that's a huge place, right? And it's not only because of the reputation that comes with the organization, but it's like, wow, like I know the hard work that you've put in. I know that what you've taken from each experience to the next is setting that bar. It's truly trailblazing. And so I love that. I've loved to witness that, honestly. How would you say the nature of communications has changed within the sports world, because as someone who studied public relations but is also a communicator on the journalism side, I think consumers constantly get smarter, right? And ultimately, and correct me again if I'm wrong, but ultimately what they want is authenticity, like actual connection, even if it's virtual. And so how would you say, from a brand perspective, right, that deals with personalities that are athletes as well as just like the organizational aspect, how can you relate to audiences that don't actually personally know them, but still get that sense of connection?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really lucky because the athletes that I work with make it so easy. They show up authentically. Like they have no, they always say that they have no choice but to just be authentic, because they are so true to who they are. They are always so at the forefront of, whether it's social issues or whatever it may be, they always like stand 10 toes down and like in what they know and believe in. And so, my job is always just facilitate and help shine light on their voices. And, you see it through social media, especially, which is something I was going to bring up about how communication has kind of changed a little bit. Like you're not just listening to the perception of, news outlets, but it's like an influencer or someone who has a lot of followers on Twitter, like whatever it may be, like whatever outlet it is, you have to also be aware of that public perception from a social media standpoint. And I think that that's definitely hard, because now it doesn't feel like PR is as much of like crafting messages that go out there, because people can see through words sometimes, but it's the genuine just like setting up the business in a way that will not lead to PR issues in the future.
100%.
So that's why it's been so, fortunately on Unrivaled, they just have built everything in a way that makes sense, that is true. It's built by athletes, for athletes. They've thought about everything when it comes to, the resources that they have available for them, to, having just the, anything they need, honestly, from recovery to training to X, Y, and Z, like you name it, they have it. And so that's, just things like that, where you're building up a positive reputation just based off like the fact that you've built a model that is, again, authentic and like real to that experience of what athletes need. So
absolutely. And I would also say with time, it's less, the athlete as a person and more of like like all encompassing, like, yes, you're a player for Unrivaled, you're this, you're that, you're a mother, you're all of these things. People no longer separate it. There is no, for lack of better wording, separation of church and state. It's like you as a person, you are a brand that is tied to all of these things. So I'm sure there's added layers to the communications aspect of that too, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And just getting to know the players. I mean, that's been part of my favorite, like the favorite part of my job is just building those relationships and knowing, you know, what player would speak on certain things, or, you know, what makes them proud, or, you know, it's just incredible to be able to see them, you know, even if it's speaking about fashion or, I don't know, just all the little ways that they are, you know, they're so multidimensional. They are mothers, they are entrepreneurs, they are just all, like, I mean, I don't know. I just have so much like respect and admiration for women's basketball players because they do it all. And so just being able to share that, you know, and connect them in a meaningful way is so impactful. But yeah, there is no line that kind of, you know, when they show up, they're their whole selves. And, you know, and that goes for pretty much anyone. Like, you want everyone to kind of feel like they have that ability to be their full self wherever they show up and feel welcomed and just respected.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've mentioned Unrivaled, but I wanted to make sure that we set the stage of who you are, your experience, how you got here. So let's actually talk about the league itself. For those who haven't maybe heard of it or aren't as familiar, tell us more.
Unrivaled is a 3-on-3 women's professional basketball league that just launched. We had our inaugural season starting January 17th. It was actually my 30th birthday, best birthday ever.
Iconic. Iconic. What a way to celebrate.
I know. When I first got the offer for the job, I was just like off the wall, so excited knowing that was how I was going to celebrate. But yes, they all the games were streamed on TNT, True TV, and Max. Played on Friday, Saturday, and Monday nights, and it was a 10-week season. And there were 6 clubs. They go there's the Rose Basketball Club, Laces, Vinyl, Lunar Owls, the Mist. And now that I'm trying to name them all, I you know how you always forget one? You're like.
Yes.
The Phantom. So they you know, it is the best women's basketball players in the world, and it was co-founded by Brianna Stewart of the New York Liberty and Nafisa Collier of the Minnesota Lynx, and they kind of just made this model because for a really long time there weren't other opportunities for women's basketball players to earn revenue and to stay home in the United States during the off season for the WNBA. So a lot of players played overseas, or they would, you know, just pursue other opportunities. But so much of what makes sense about Unrivaled is that it's putting the players on the court, is keeping them in the United States. It's allowing other brands to work with them throughout the year and allowing fans to just continue connecting with them. And our social media definitely played a huge role in, you know, the success of Unrivaled, and just being able to see how many people were, you know, engaging with us, and just the excitement and the joy that the players got from, you know, just whether that was their own, you know, TikToks that they made or just, you know, doing the different prompts that we had. It was just a really fun atmosphere. We were all staying down in Miami together, and just, yeah, playing ball.
I love it. I love the vision, and honestly, what you were saying, I'm sure people see the difference and the love that it was made with, simply because it is, like you said, by players for players.
Yeah.
I've always, as someone who doesn't understand many sports, but as the Colombian that I am, I very much follow the Colombian soccer team. And obviously, you know, being a New Yorker, I make it a point to support our local teams as well. Yeah. I will say that it doesn't take an expert to recognize that sports, among other things, unite people.
Yeah.
You know, you kind of leave your worries at the door. You're invested for the time that the game is on for, right? And you also identify with the players, you know? So that's so beautiful. You know, you just mentioned you wrapped up the first season. Tell us about what it's like to be the inaugural communications director. So literally coming into something that is so fresh, right?
Yeah.
Something you clearly believe in, at such a historic time, and being able to come in to kind of help shape the future. So was that intimidating? Was it exciting? Was it all the above?
Yes, definitely all of the above. I think that, you know, I had an opportunity to build out a little bit of a team down in Miami, and I was super grateful for, you know, their help as well. Tori Newman is now with the Dallas Wings, which is really exciting. I had Ryan Stevens, who was previously with the Indiana Fever, down there helping, and it just was so cool to kind of take all the experiences that I had throughout my career. I think this was one of those moments where, again, it was intimidating, but I knew that I was uniquely positioned for this role because of everything I had done to date. So, I worked on the team side, I worked on the league side, I know what it's like to communicate from both levels. And there are, little just like procedural things that you need to do when you're working for a team, whether that's credentialing or just getting back to certain people on a timeline, setting up interviews, kind of establishing a process for when players will be made available, the post-game press conferences. There's just like a million different things to kind of set up in that way. But then there's also, you're looking at it from a league perspective and getting, the commissioner, Mickey Lawler, out there and the president, Alex Bazell, a speaking engagement, setting them up for interviews, just talking about the league, how it's going in the future, and all these little things in between. So, when I explain to people that it's, not just doing the actual, day-to-day communications, like league, team, and it was all 6 clubs, by the way. Like, it was with 36 players, 6 head coaches. So it ended up being a lot of management. But it was so fun. Like, I mean, I've never worked harder, and I've never been more grateful for it. It was just the best. It was the best opportunity, and I think that's something that's incredible coming out of it too. Is that now I'm in a position to say, like, okay, this went really well, or this we need more people, or we need X, Y, and Z to make sure that it'll flow a little bit smoother. But it was kind of getting started with the knowledge that I had, and really just kind of being proud of what we were able to accomplish throughout the season. So
as you should be. It takes a lot. Honestly, hats off. Seriously. Do you mind shedding light a little bit on what it was like to already be in an established organization, right? And then being presented with this idea, and you're like, oh my gosh, were you conflicted? Like, what was it about the opportunity, and or what were things that you were kind of weighing that made you feel like this was the right move, it was the right time? Because I'm sure many can relate that it's never linear, it's never straightforward, and there is risk involved, but that's maybe where the love for the sport and how much you believe in it comes into play.
Absolutely. I think that I definitely believed in the vision for the sport. First of all, I knew that, the energy and excitement for women's basketball is at an all-time high. If there were ever a time, I mean, I'm still relatively young. I, don't have children.
You're
there are so
prime.
many
Hell yeah, you're young.
There's just so many reasons why it worked out to take this opportunity now. I mean, it didn't feel like a risk at all. Honestly, I just felt like it was the right thing. It was a huge step in my career, and just I think it was really exciting to me to go from those established organizations to something that was getting created or just starting up, because when I was working for the Commanders, it was like we're celebrating the 85th anniversary, and it's like, my goodness, and then at the NBA, it was like 75th anniversary. It's just like long history and tenure and, process and ways that things have been done before. And I just felt like as I was approaching 30 and I had been at the league office for over 5 years, I was just like, what is next, and how can I grow? And I was kind of deciding what might be the next step, or what might make most sense for my career. And this kind of just, again, was the perfect combination of everything I was kind of looking for, my experiences leading up to it, and just the opportunity to be part of something that I knew was going to be so historic. I don't know many people who would pass it up, and I think that it's definitely intimidating, and I was scared because I hadn't for so long. I mean, it's even little things where it's like, okay, do I fill out 0 or 1 when I'm claiming the tax
oh
stuff,
my God,
or the benefits?
Don't even get me started. Do not even get me started.
I hate that so much. I still call my parents every single time I do that.
Oh, 100%. So they're adults premium.
Yeah. So it was hard to kind of go in that perspective. I'm like, I need to grow up at some point. I felt like there was a little bit of a buffer when I was at the league office, because it is a really incredible organization to work for. You have so many great benefits and just all these different things that, aside from the job part of it, it's just like, oh, it's a good place to work. And so, that definitely was hard to leave just because of the comfort, but that's never a good reason to stay somewhere. And so I think that it was just something for me where it was, it felt like it was time. I wanted to grow my career. I wanted to do more with women's sports and women's basketball specifically. And it just, again, was the perfect opportunity. So I was grateful.
I love it. I think it's really easy to make assumptions from the outside looking in, right? And those who follow you and those who don't, we'll get to that in a second too. But make assumptions about what your job actually entails, right? Yeah. Anyone who will look at what you post will be like, oh my gosh, you travel, you get to hang out with really cool athletes and wear awesome outfits and go to events, but I don't think enough attention or enough credit is given for everything else that a role like yours entails. So talk about that. Like, please tell us what we don't get to see, the unspoken, the unheard of things that no one really gets to see, but it are fundamental to what eventually does reach the public.
Yeah, honestly, I think that also every organization that I worked for was a little bit different when it came to like the behind the scenes. I actually have now gone private on Instagram just because I don't want people to get this like false sense of who I am based on just like following me and just knowing that there's a lot of younger people who want to work in sports or like see what I'm posting and like I don't want to have any disillusionment around what it's like, but obviously people are always going to post highlights and I will not post anything time when I'm crying or I'm stressed out, but and that's inevitable and wherever you work, but when I was at the Commanders, it was my first job out of college. And so I was kind of working so much, but I didn't think much of it. It was kind of always on. And in communications especially, you never know when news is going to break or like if something's going to happen. You just have to be kind of on call in a way all the time. So that was a little bit... that was a bit of a challenge when I first got started in my career because I was like, I didn't realize it was going to be like all the time, which is, it's totally fine. But I also wouldn't really notice it until some of my friends were like, wow, you work a lot. And I was like, I didn't really think about it because you love it. You love what you do. And I think that that's what, honestly, just sports is about. And, people do really enjoy the opportunity and, it is a blessing to be able to work in sports because it's like a job that doesn't feel like a job, even if you're working crazy hours sometimes. And so I think that the team level of it, you do end up working a little bit more because you'll be working the games. And like that's after a day of like 9 to 5, like unless you're on a different schedule or, don't need to be there full time. So the days definitely can get long. When I was in Unrivaled, some of the things that people didn't see is like I had a clothes rack in my office because I would go into the office, like 8:39 in the morning and like totally normal, but would just be wearing leggings and a hoodie and work all day. And then, the games would start at 7:30 or 6 o'clock on Friday nights or Saturdays, my bad. And, I would change into the outfit I was going to wear because I didn't want to be dressed in a blazer and like pantsuit, whatever, all day long. So that's just like a funny thing that most people wouldn't really think about, or just, I don't know, just having that kind of balance there because I wanted to be comfy and then I wanted to change. But that also just speaks volumes. So I was like, okay, I get in at 9 and then you're maybe leaving at like 10, 11 at night. But again, it was an 8-week stretch. It was totally something that I was, happy to do. And so you're going to work long hours sometimes, but it's not, not doable. It's just always making sure that you're prioritizing, eating well and also trying to find time to exercise. Definitely there were nights, like as I was saying, I was recovering from ACL surgery. So like I would be at the gym at like midnight, like just because I knew I needed to get it in. So you just like make sacrifices, but that's kind of what it's about.
Yeah. Is there maybe an anecdote you want to share of like a highlight of your time thus far, or something that people would be surprised to hear about a typical day, or maybe the fact that you don't have a typical day?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think one of the highlights from this year, especially, it was kind of trying to create some more like authentic, but like I planned it type moments because a lot of the, the games day in and day out, like a lot of the people following Unrivaled were probably excited about the fact that the league was starting and that it was new and different and whatever. But when it came to like day-to-day press conferences, it's like, how do we make people want to watch these, or, just get some valuable clips from the players from it or sound bites or whatever it may be. And so after the game where Brittany Griner dunked, and it was the first, dunk in Unrivaled history, Lisa Leslie also notably was one of the analysts that we had, during the games and calling the games. And so, I was thinking like it would be really cool if Lisa went and asked BG a question in the press conference about what it was like to have the inaugural dunk, given that she had the first dunk in WNBA history. And so I went over, and she never would join a press conference otherwise. So then just going over and be like, hey, like, sorry to make you work more, but like, do you mind maybe like coming in asking BG a question? Just thought it would be a really cool moment, and just being able to like, speak to how historic it is and just this moment in general for women's basketball history. And so she did, and it ended up, turning into like articles and just like really, seeing BG's face, they were like, wow, that is really cool. I didn't even think about that, but, really nice and all this kind of stuff. So I think that was something that I was so proud of, because it was just thinking of these little moments that show just how connected, Unrivaled was with the women's basketball ecosystem and history, but also just something that people probably didn't know that I would need to do that, that I would need to go and ask her if she would go join the press conference, because it was something that I was running and I knew when she would be on the podium and whatever. So it just, little stuff like that.
I want to give you some credit, because when you were talking about that, you were like, I wanted an authentic moment that was planned, and you kind of, the way that you mentioned it made it seem like the fact that it was planned wouldn't be authentic. But I want to give you credit, honestly, because I think intentionality is very important, and I think in order to be intentional, you really need to know your shit, and you need to know, like you were saying earlier, the players, every aspect of the game, what you're trying to convey through the league. So just give yourself credit. Yeah. And we need to give flowers where they're due. I'm curious to know what the difference is between when you're active in the season, right, versus what do you do now that you're kind of in between season? What's your focus? What may people not necessarily think about that happens during this time?
Yeah, it's like year round. I mean, there's a lot of planning that always goes into it. Obviously, it's the postseason recapping and then the moving into next season planning. But just showing up, at different moments. So, still planning what, where Unrivaled will be during the year, and just kind of staying in touch with the ecosystem in general. Obviously, all the Unrivaled players are going to be in the WNBA this summer. And so just tapping into those conversations, making sure we're staying up to date and current. There's plenty of speaking engagements that our commissioner and our president will be at, and just, prepping them for those kinds of things, and just any other, whether it's upcoming player signings, because next year, just looking at how we did it first. Last year, they, Unrivaled would announce players every, couple days, or whatever it was, the cadence of announcing who was going to be Unrivaled, and, dropping the hints and stuff like that. So they're just getting into that again, and how we're going to do it this year. So just a lot of different, a lot of moving parts that I feel like people don't realize, even when you're, at the WNBA, for example, there is a lot that goes on during the off season, even though it feels long. You're integrated at NBA All-Star, you're planning for the WNBA draft, everything kind of comes up way quicker than you would assume when it, the season ends October 25th and you're back kind of training camps at the end of April, but, the draft just happened, recently. And so it just is, it's it's always ongoing. And then also, just dealing with media outreach, if people have questions about certain things, or if something comes up during the WNBA season, or if Unrivaled is part of the conversation, just, tapping into that narrative and, chatting with any reporters, and just keeping the kind of relationships ongoing.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's so insightful. I would say also, too, why don't you talk about, you're only 30, right? So you're still super young in your career, despite reaching what you have. We still have, years left, right? As you think about what you want to work towards personally and professionally, without taking away from the fact that it is important to be present, right? Yeah. What would you like to be known for? What legacy do you want to leave, either in the world of sports or just in the world in general, with the work that you're doing?
That's such a good question. And it's definitely intimidating, because you never want to think that you're occupying a bigger space or than people might think, or that I just am proud to be a part of a larger ecosystem, and part of this huge upswell, and just making women's basketball as notable and as big as it can be. I don't know. I really do have a lot of just goals and aspirations, and just continuing to, push forward and be someone who is, seen as an executive, or, whatever that may be, and just to kind of just keep growing in this field. Because again, I don't think about it often, but sometimes every now and then people will reach out to me, or a younger student or someone is wow, you're so inspiring, or this and that. And I was just I don't ever really think of myself in that way, and I don't like to let it kind of just get to me at all, because I don't see myself in that way. I just try to, again, do a good job and kind of keep my head down and work hard, and just be present and be grateful for what I've been given and the opportunities that I've been afforded. And you know, a lot of that comes back to just like how I was raised and my parents and everything. And so really grateful that they, you know, not only gave me the belief that I could do whatever I set my mind to, but just that, you know, it's important to always just thank others and be, again, just grateful for everything that you've been given.
I love that. I can relate 100% to feeling like you should keep your head down and that balance of like, yes, I'm proud of what I'm doing, but I don't want it to come across as like pretentious, right? And I think especially being who we are, right? Women, Latinas in all of these industries, right? I won't speak for you, but I'll speak for myself. There have been times where I'm like, wow, like, what is that balance of talking about my work in a way that people understand that I'm sharing it with this bigger purpose of like, you can do this too, you know, not because I'm bragging or this like bigger picture.
I know.
Let's talk about the impact of your work, right? And maybe anything that stands out as you look to your time so far, anything that particularly surprised you or took you aback that added perspective to the impact your work is having?
Yeah, honestly, this happened pretty recently. I was on a panel with one of the Unrivaled players and a women's basketball writer, and it was one of the players that I really didn't have as great of a relationship with or just didn't get a chance to really bond with while I was down at Unrivaled. And I, you know, was on this panel and just talking about the different processes we had and, you know, what worked and what didn't. And all the while I was thinking, I was like, oh, you know, I really wonder what her thoughts were. And I even asked her during the panel, I was like, what did you think here in the X, Y, and Z? And so after the panel, though, I went up to her and I said, thank you so much for like not just bashing me. You could have absolutely said, well, I hated this and they could have done better with this and whatever. So I was like, I'm very appreciative. And she was like, no, it's great. Like, I really do get it. You know, they, you know, across all of Unrivaled, all the athletes, they gained 950,000 followers over the course of the season, and that was just
10 weeks.
Yeah,
as a reminder, in 10 weeks this happened.
So
that's
almost
huge.
1 million followers gained across all their platforms, and it was a huge, you know, just benefit, obviously, you know, for a number of reasons, but they just see the value that, you know, being more on social and being in more in conversations or being in the media more, and how that is beneficial to building their brand. And so that was just really nice because I wasn't expecting that, especially from a player that I didn't really know as well or knew if she even knew what I did, you know, as well, because there were so many people running around during the season at Unrivaled. So it was just really cool, and I was super grateful for that feedback.
You mentioned, I was just about to say, you mentioned the importance of feedback, right?
Yeah.
And I'd love to take a second to talk about learning opportunities, right? Because feedback in general, I think it's personally a gift, but when it doesn't align with maybe what you were expecting or like your point of view, it can be difficult to take. So what advice do you have for those listening for not only seeking feedback, but also receiving it and using it as an area of growth and like a positive opportunity to do better, as opposed to letting it get to you and be like, oh my gosh, like I'm so discouraged, or it's difficult to maybe please others, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, I think it's hard because I think that feedback, no matter what, is always going to be a little bit personal, especially when you take what you do so seriously. It's a, you know, a struggle that I probably will still face if someone gives me feedback. But I think that, you know, especially when it comes to your career, just knowing that things aren't personal, sometimes it really is just about, we need this to be X, Y, and Z, and just not, you know, trying to internalize it or make it your worth. And I think that some of that also comes from not making your job or your career your entire self-worth. Having areas of self-worth that are not your job, so you can go home and be like, well, I'm still really great at X, Y, and Z. I'm the great friend. I'm a great dog mom. I'm whatever else.
The best.
Yeah.
And dog aunt, tomato.
So like stuff like that, where it just is like you're not putting too much pressure on your day-to-day, because, you know, it's never that serious, and people only provide feedback in the hopes, I mean, you would hope that people would only provide feedback so that you can get better and you can improve and become a better person because of it. And so that, you know, again, it's not to say that it won't be harsh if you hear it, but I think it's also something that we should get in the habit of asking more of, even if you're in, you know, in a position where you aren't getting a lot of feedback or, you know, don't have quarterly reviews or whatever it may be, because that will, first of all, just kind of, it's almost like exposure therapy, where it's like the more feedback you get, the less it's going to hurt. But then it'll just kind of make the person who is supervising you or whoever else see that you're really invested in getting better and growing and, you know, progressing. And so, you know, I advocate for that too, just like asking for more feedback and just being, you know, willing to, you know, take it on the chin and then, you know, just rest on the fact that it's not your entire life, but obviously something you really care about.
Of course. Oh, such an important reminder. Okay, so here we are, right, in a space that I like to consider as if we were in our sala, in our living room, with all of that kind of openness and vulnerability that you've already demonstrated. Give us an inside scoop. What can you share? What's some insider info that we can look forward to? That's related to Unrivaled. What's coming up in the next couple of months, or anything that you're particularly excited about that listeners can get excited about too?
Honestly, I think that just the players that we're bringing in, and continuing to bring back to Unrivaled. I can't give away too many secrets. My boss will kill me.
Yeah.
So
I tried, guys.
But there are a lot of just great things that we have planned. A tour model has been in the conversation with Unrivaled. So just, what that's going to look like, exactly where we're going to be. I think that's an exciting announcement coming for sure, because that's, we have our footprint in Miami, and that's, where we want to be. But, our president and commissioner have talked about, wanting to take, the show on the road a little bit and just getting in front of more fans. And so that's a really exciting thing to look out for.
Oh, I'm excited for whenever you can share that. I also think, too, it speaks to what you were saying of the whole purpose of why the league was created, in terms of being able to keep the players home, right? But at the same time, exposing them more to their fans and really nurturing that relationship. So I'm super excited about that.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up, would love to share with those listening as well, how can they get in touch with you, or how can they keep up with everything Unrivaled?
Yeah.
What's
Absolutely.
the best way?
I mean, so Unrivaled socials for sure. They continue to post, on X and TikTok, Instagram. We update our website regularly. That's where you'll see all my news for sure that
Perfect.
Is posted. But I do have my TikTok channel, but I've stopped posting as much. I feel like it got a little overwhelming, but I did have a channel where I was talking about what it was like getting into the sports industry and, gained a lot of followers through that when I was at the NBA. And so, the last time I posted, I think, was about, Unrivaled and looking for people to come join my team. And so that was the last time I posted. So I can't say I share too many updates there. But just in general, just keeping up with Unrivaled on socials is the best place to find us.
That's exciting. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you, is there anything else you want to take advantage of the opportunity to say? Anything I maybe didn't touch on?
I think I'm just so grateful to you, honestly, for inviting me onto this, and just to be able to speak a little bit more. And I think that it's helpful for me to, first of all, be able to listen to myself back, and in the future that'll be really great. But also just knowing that my story is being shared a little bit more. I think that it is important to give voices to Latinas. I think especially what's going on in this country right now, I think it's more important than ever to support those who may be having more challenges. I think even just showing up in life right now, and so just wanting to say that just continue to do what you're doing, and that you're doing really important work, and that I'm very, very proud to be your friend.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, likewise. And like you said, representation matters, and that's what we're here to do, right? So thank you for joining me on this journey.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you all for listening. Catch you next week with more Convos with Sazón. Bye.